Um, Normally, what we would do at this point is I would ask what y'all are listening to, but today I'm hosting and I want to ask you a special question. What do you think the future of pop music is? This is something that I have thought a lot about recently, and I wanted to open the floor to y'all's. Uh, I
Can
know,
I go first?
yes.
Okay. I'm going to tell you the thing I planned to do to respond to this question, but forgot, but I don't think I'm going to have another chance for it. So, what I meant to do was make a bowl of popcorn and then say it's corn and just pick up my bowl of popcorn and sit here and eat it while you all talk. But I got attacked by a cat, and by that I mean the cat needed to cuddle, and so I didn't have time to make
Mhm.
my popcorn. But realistically, I have no idea. I have not really been keeping up very well with like the mainstream top 40 pop scene over the last couple of years. I haven't been listening to my pop radio for a little bit because my commute to work is super short. So why would I? By the time we got through the ads, I would be at work.
Mm.
So I don't know. The one trend I have seen just across the board is, and I think we've been seeing this for a long time in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places, but is sort of the globalization of pop. It's feeling like pop as a whole across the world is blending and mixing with so many different sounds and so many different traditional sounds, and then things that become mainstream in one part of the world sort of make their way over elsewhere. I don't know how. I mean, I know that that's been happening in some degree for a very long time. You look at
Mhm.
like the Beatles even,
Yeah, yeah.
but it feels like it's happening really rapidly right now, and so the changing trends and everything is happening across everybody everywhere all the time. But I also think it's making a lot of really cool combinations of sounds that we might not otherwise hear without like the internet or TikTok able to expose more people to it. I think that's all I have to say, so it's all you all know.
Yeah. Yeah, just in response to that, like I had similar thoughts in regards to the globalization that like I think in the near future I hope to see more like West African acts like CK. Um Definitely like K-pop has made it really strong recently. And more globalization just seems like a thing that's gonna happen. Alexis, how about you?
Uh, so I agree with the idea of globalization, and that's something I'm actually really excited about. Um, I think the not just getting to appreciate the appeal of other countries is really exciting, but also seeing their impact on other musicians is really cool. So I am all for the globalization of pop music and embracing a more global uh, pop tradition in terms of how it affects touring and fan bases. That's something that I'm just extremely excited for. Another thing that I think I'm noticing is kind of the playlistification of pop music.
Mm,
I think this is a trend that I've been noticing for about maybe 6, 7 years, and I think that this is something that's kind of been given rise to from just streaming platforms being a major contender in terms of like consumption of how we listen to music on a day-to-day basis, but also um, how we just consume music in terms of being fed new music. It's how we listen to the music that we already love, but like also how we get introduced to new music. And I think like that's really taking it's I think it's really something that's impacting the industry of pop in a big way. Like when I think of like uh, playlists as a product, I think that is an idea that's becoming more of reality these days. Because I think like when you think of pop music, we think of the tours and we think of albums, and I think this is changing with like streaming platforms and also like just YouTube in general as a media platform as well. And I think like more and more artists are like legitimately considering playlists as a part of their product cycle in a way. I think of like artists like Drake who releases like albums that are like 20, 25 songs long. You can call it a double album, but in terms of like how we digest it and like what's happening on the album, they feel like more of like these just playlists that are, geared towards streaming, as well as how these pop songs are almost like these snapshots rather than these big, pop hits. And I think that's really cool. And I think the future of music is in, streaming consumption as well. And I think, artists like the 1975, Drake, utilizing and thinking about how we consume music on those platforms and gearing their, you know, major album releases towards a more playlist friendly sort of consumption. I think that is just part of like the trend of moving forward
Mm.
with pop music. And I think that's going to also affect uh, what we hear from the artists, because if there's more music, chances are they're going to be more creatively bold in terms of like what sounds they're going to be experimenting with on those songs. So yeah, I think that's another thing that I'm noticing is not just the globalization, but the playlistification of pop music.
So it's almost as if we've come full circle, that we've gone to digital music, which kind of killed the album, and then now
Hmm.
we're back to playlists, which are just
Yeah,
digital albums essentially. But
yeah,
there's also the chance of like random other playlists picking up one of those songs, so it's like just
hmm,
increasing their odds of being
yeah,
distributed and heard at the
yeah,
same time.
yeah, yeah. And I also don't want to say like pop music is totally losing the album, uh, in the future. I don't think that, because I feel like um, albums in general are more than just a package of music. They are a platform for artists that want to like state something. Like albums are ways to either express a cinematic idea, or a way for an artist to use it as a platform to stand up for change or something. Um, and I think the album, to do that, is still going to be an idea for musicians as an outlet for those types of platforms. But I also think like that isn't the only avenue that artists are going to have in the future with in terms of like product. I
Mm.
think the album isn't they're not restricted to just releasing an album now. I think like releasing a playlist as a product, much like a CD or a vinyl record, is going to be the future of pop, as well as still having the album as a possibility of a platform for a bigger message or a more cinematic experience as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Just to clarify, we are talking like Western US pop specifically in this conversation, right?
I mean, specifically, yeah, American consumption, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or like we as Americans, what are we perceiving? What are we getting from the industry? Um,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Because I
don't
feel like,
have as much input or like vision on other stuff. Yeah.
well, and I think just an interesting point to make, and even related to globalization, I think we might see some change coming because of this. I feel like a lot of people don't realize how different the pop music world is depending on where you are and what the,
Hmm.
like, there's a whole different pop music culture depending on the country and the society and the
Yep.
culture there. I say that, I mean, I'm not an expert in world music, and I couldn't tell you the majority of countries. I do know the K-pop world okay, pretty well. Um, and it is so vastly different the way that music is consumed there compared to in the US. When
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when I'm talking to somebody and I say things like, well, a tour is a pretty big deal and pretty rare for a K-pop artist, and they just look shocked. They're like, what do you mean? Artists are supposed to tour, like that's their job. And I'm like, well, there are all these other things that they do instead that we don't have here.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to clarify our conversation
Mm.
is not speaking necessarily, even though
Right.
we're talking about globalization, it's not speaking globally about the trends because we
Right.
don't know them.
Right.
Mm. Yeah. And I think my idea for this conversation was really geared around like Billboard Top 100, sort of what are we gonna see? What's gonna play on the radio? What's gonna be the most visual, well, visible? What's gonna be the most visible and
Hmm.
all that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think my input on this is that like artists are playing with genre more, which goes hand in hand with the globalization that like you often say like genre isn't a thing anymore, which and I respond, well, it is historically,
Yeah.
and which is important to understand. But like it's a really good thing. It's a really cool thing that genres are blending so much because a lot of those older genres also came often with like socioeconomic divides, which is not so good. Um,
Hmm.
and I think, but the other thing is that we are now, ever since Daft Punk released Random Access Memories, we have become in this like constant state of like retroification, which is cool in a lot of ways. That like I really like older music I did before that happened, and like to be able to hear older styles of music with modern production techniques is really fun for me. I think I enjoy more the genres that aren't being played on the radio as much right now because I think disco and funk have been really strong recently. Ever since that album released, The Weeknd is doing stuff with like 80s stuff, and since Stranger Things has become popular, like 80s stuff is back really strong right now. Um, we're beginning to see early 90s things like or late 80s early 90s things like house
Hmm.
music, more on that later. uh
Hmm.
and but the thing is, the reason that's going to stay strong is because studio executives are now actively shopping around songs that interpolate or sample older songs to artists because that's what makes them money. It's an
Somebody listened to
easy
Switched
way.
on Pop this
Yeah,
week.
I that's a very recent switched on pop episode. It's pretty fascinating just hearing the business side of that. And it's a little depressing, but like it is what it is. I don't think there's any escaping it now that they've figured out that's a good way to make money. Um, and I'm hoping at least that when they mine their like older genres, they're gonna eventually run out of this like disco funk nostalgia and like branch out a little more.
Hmm.
um yeah, like maybe we see another emo revival. That would be fun. Um
Yeah.
I think we're getting
and
there.
yeah, I think we're getting there. And
But
but
it's like
it's
mostly indie
mhm,
pop girls.
mm,
Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
yeah, I think we're inching towards that, which is nice. Um and we're eventually going to get sick of that too. But I'm thinking like what about past that? What about innovation? Because it's a weird state that we're in where we are in the era of the bedroom producer where with present day technology someone with a microphone and a laptop and the right software can make a song sound like whatever they want it to, however they imagine it. And yet while we're doing that we're seeing this kind of sort of lack in creativity from like the top 40, but in terms of what we do in this podcast, we bring songs from artists that are being incredibly creative, and just because that ecosystem is so strong in the top 40, they're not really getting as much opportunity to like get their moment in the sun, I think, which is a little depressing. um
Hmm.
and something I've also been thinking about is like sometimes the best way to look forward is to look back. And there were lots of socioeconomic things or cultural things like globalization that have changed a lot of genre in the past. Like you mentioned with the Beatles bringing in like Indian culture in the 60s was like really huge. Um, but another thing is like technology. So technology has like a huge impact on what is going to be heard and available. So for example, the invention of the microphone switched us from opera and vaudeville to like crooner jazz. And then the electric guitar and amp in the 50s like made rock and roll happen. And then the electric organ became popular in the 60s, and that made a whole sea change of like different sounds as well. Stevie Wonder in the early 70s, like that like electric keyboard from Superstition was at the time cutting edge technology that he was just like, I'm gonna make this sound really interesting. I'm gonna use whatever I can do like with technology to make that happen. Um, then we get to the 80s and we have like synthesizers becoming popular. And I heard once that mathematically speaking, the 80s was the most uniform decade in terms of pop music. That like if you were to feed all the music like and like quantify it into a computer and be like how different are different genres and like eras, the 80s is the most uniform because everybody was using synthesizers.
Mhm.
Um, and so like with this line of reasoning, like kind of ignoring the socio things, the cultural things that are going to change because that's not something we can really predict as well. Um, but like technology wise, we can kind of like see a path forward. And what I'm going to say next is something I don't really have sources for. I don't really have a lot of inside scoops, and I don't consider myself an expert on the topic. This is just my own personal speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's something I find both fascinating and to a greater extent terrifying. Thinking about the way technology is gonna like lead us into changes in pop music is, yes,
Can
K.
you hear my cat making very strange
No, I
noises?
cannot hear your cat.
That's good. If I seem distracted, it's my cat making very strange noises on
Okay.
my lap.
Okay,
Continue.
well, cat pop music is another option that we have for the spreading of genres,
It
I
does
think.
kind of sound like you could like pitch bend it. It could be a four on the
Mm,
floor beat.
yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of pitch bending, though, I think near future we're going to see technology do things like have more realistic midis to the point where you might not be able to tell the difference between them. I think the core thing for music, well, I mean society as a whole, but we're looking at music right now, is the implementation of artificial intelligence or AI into music production. And I think that's going to be applied to, say, autotune. Like you add an AI to autotune, it might not be perceptible anymore as autotune. Like current day, autotune has like this sort of metallic sheen to it, or like a little bit of a buzz, and you can kind of tell it's autotune. Like that's gonna go away. Um, they already have AI like arranging and producing songs.
Mhm.
There was recently an article about a rapper FN Mecca who was
Mhm.
signed to Capitol Records, and the voice was a person, but like everything in terms of the lyrics and the notes and all that stuff was AI generated, and that created a big stir because the producers on that were a couple of white guys, and they were making lyrics that were a lot of n words in there, and it's
Mhm.
just like that's not cool. So the Capitol, I think, unsigned them because people were very mad about it, but like that's a thing now, and you gotta like me thinking about where does this go to eventually, if we're gonna have be in the land of like deep fakes and AI and autotune and like AI generated music, we're gonna have some, I think, Milli Vanilli situations where like we have what we think on screen is a real person and it's an AI. Maybe even like the other way around, where like they present it as an AI and like someone's trying to sneak in their
Mhm.
real human music into there.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, but like even live performances, if they can get down the processing latency enough, they can essentially lip sync or like sing whatever they want into the microphone and it can sound completely different coming out the other ends
Mhm.
into like amps or speakers or into the recording booth. Um, and because that AI process might be cheaper than having real people in it, then what are the market forces going to do with music production? Is like you could have
Mhm.
studio executives who are like, I'm gonna make 1,000 songs that are AI generated and see if one of them hits, rather than try to find actual talent. So that's,
Mhm.
I think it's gonna be down to society to be like, we're gonna put a premium on real people, but then at the same time, it's like, how are we gonna tell? So that's I what I find like fascinating and scary at the same time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that you're describing a thing that people have been like afraid of for a long time, and while technology advances, it's not advancing as quickly as people fear that it is.
I
Hmm.
It's actually interesting you bring up the fake person, fake AI thing. There was a sort of, I don't know how viral it was, but there was a viral esque at least video on TikTok recently where a woman came on, and there had been videos from like a redheaded man, I don't remember his name, who comes on and talks about whatever, and then he comes on screen and talks about AI. Like, could you believe that if a creator was fake, was AI? And then it like kind of glitches his voice out and glitches the thing out, and he kind of morphs into a woman sitting there who claims that she had created this basically AI persona that had tricked everybody that it was a real person. Everybody believed it and like freaked out about the future of AI. And then a few days later, they were like, "That was a joke. Like we are two different people that both exist in real world." And like wanted to show you that it's like not as scary as you think that it is.
I
It's interesting you bring that up because it's literally just happened on
mm,
TikTok.
I get that point, but I think it's just a matter of time at the same time because we do have AI doing things like noise suppression, which are getting better and better. We have um deepfakes, which are AI applied to like changing people's faces, which is getting very realistic. We have, and it's just where that gets applied. So like I recently, very recently, there was the Google AI that basically passed the Turing test with one of the Google engineers, and they're like, it's sentient now. And everyone else at Google's like, no, that's ridiculous. But like, if you read the transcript, it's pretty convincing, and you can think like, oh, it could have scraped these answers together from the internet, but like some of the, like there's a Q&A where the answers to the questions that are being provided are very thought out
Hmm.
and unique feeling at the same time. And then there's, are you aware of the Dolly 2 AI that's doing art? You
Yeah, I've heard
feed
of
it,
that.
yeah, yeah. So like that's pretty impressive, and so a lot of people in the art industry are also a little scared because like even in game engines right now, they're having auto generated worlds. That's a thing that's
Hmm.
happening right now. So like
Hmm.
you feed it enough imagery and it'll do it. And I
Hmm.
think if that can be applied to something that seems as complicated as visual art, that can be applied to music as well. Because it's also
Hmm.
already been it's also already being done for written forms. Like there are a lot of Associated Press articles that are AI generated right now. Because
Hmm.
if you just feed it enough bullet points from like what news is happening, it can do that in a very like basic way.
Hmm.
That's a pretty straightforward sort of platform, though, and somebody has to have the bullet points to begin with.
Yeah,
The AI aren't generating the bullet points. Like they're it's not the starting point. My cat is chasing his own tail around my closet right now.
adorable.
Um, cat, you are distracting. Anyway, I don't think I have anything else to say.
Yeah, that's
Although
about
I think it is
yeah.
like sort of fear mongery though to be like AI is gonna take over everything. Like it's not. Let's one step at a time. It perhaps.
Maybe. I'm a dystopian futurist, I suppose. Yeah,
I think these are really fascinating ideas, and I think it takes it one step further of kind of like kind of like the ideas that I've been thinking about in terms of like the direction of like AI and its involvement with music, because that's been an ongoing idea that I've had for a while now, and I've been kind of like having like my own kind of like internal conversation of like what does that even look like and what does that even mean, and thinking of it in terms of like it being part of the industry. Like I think like you're bringing up that idea now, and I think that's really really fascinating. So yeah, I feel like this is going to give me a lot more to think about. um and possibly be afraid of the music dystopia that is going to be around the corner.
Musical Terminator's coming for us.
No spiraling, please.
No spiraling,
Yeah.
please.
I feel like what would be really fun is, I think, like, we should boil down, like, our key features as hosts in terms of like our visual key features, feed it to Dolly, and then that be our visual representations for the podcast moving forward.
I'll let you
I want
handle that.
Okay.
That'd be fun.
Sounds cheap.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry if we went too far askew from our normal scheduled programming. Get back on track now. I just wanted to have that conversation with y'all because I respect your thoughts and opinions. And
Yeah.
I appreciate your pushback, Kay. But anyways, back to songs. Kay, you're first.
This is gonna be a very different conversation here.
Yes.
I'm talking about real people. Let me turn on
Yeah,
my
you're
light
gonna-
really quick.
You're going to be restoring humanity to us, which I'm really excited
Oh,
about.
good. I love humanity, kind of, sometimes.